Welcome, everyone, and good evening. I'm glad you're here tonight. My name is Tommy Messenger. I am one of the founders of the K through 12 Impact Community and Academies, and my co-host. I'm joined with Tom Davis, one of the other founders of the K through 12 Impact Academies. So thank you for joining us. Funny 101 for EdTech: How District Dollars Drive Decisions. So it's really a conversation designed to help anyone selling into or supporting K through 12 speak confidently about funding. And so joined tonight, we have two incredible leaders. We have Luis Valentino, a former superintendent and cabinet level leader who's overseen $1 million district budgets and district-wide strategic priorities. And we have Dr. Tiffany Morse, a former superintendent and current assistant superintendent with deep expertise in grants, CTE funding, and how state policy shapes district spending. Luis and Tiffany, how are you guys doing tonight?
Doing well, thank you.
Awesome.
For having us.
Awesome. And if you're just tuning in, a huge part of this webinar is questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little chat icon. So if you hover over the little icon there, you can drop your question in the chat. A big part of this webinar, we have a great conversation planned. But part of this is we want to be responsive and listen to what you guys, and it's a great chance to pick the brain of a district leader and ask questions around district funding. And so without further ado, let's jump into it. Kind of first question is, when people talk about district funding, what does that actually mean? So kind of to frame that question, what are the different types of funding? What are the buckets districts can access when it comes to funding? Let's start with you, Tiffany.
Right. Thank you. First of all, I'm excited to be here. Ironically, though, for an EdTech conference, I am having some tech problems, so please forgive me. My connection seems like it's going in and out. So if you can't hear me, somebody can let me know in the chat. So getting to the question, the two main factors that make up our funding that I think are really important to understand is the number of students that we have, how often they come to school, and second, the number of underserved students we have in the district. And those two things really drive everything, all the resources that we have in a district. So for that, those two big buckets of things that give us our funding, really what we have, the money we have to, I'll say, play with to use that isn't already 100% allocated on staff or utilities or anything is really kind of our LCAP money. Our LCAP portion is really for improved and enhanced services and really intended to be for our most vulnerable populations. And I think that's really important to understand that we have money from the state that's dedicated to serving those populations. So the more that you can talk about how services enhance and products enhance services for those students, the easier it is for us to say, yes, this is a good fit for our LCAP money. So that's really what we call our unrestricted money on one side. And then we have our restricted funds. We have special grants for special services. So that might be your career and technical education, mental health and wellness, after school, maybe districts have safety grants. Those are really interesting because they're primarily going to be one-time funding, or we're going to have to reapply for them regularly, and they can tend to be highly variable. So I think it's important if you're providing services to a district to understand, are you in those restricted funds? Is it something that we are going to have to really think about every single year? How much money are we going to get? When does our grant cycle end? When do we have to expend it? So for you to know and understand that at some level, I think is important. And we talked briefly, we had a little prep meeting yesterday, and we talked about, in a district, 85% of our budget is spent on people. We have a big chunk that's going to utilities, gas for buses, things like that, things we have no control over. So it's really a very small portion of our budget that we have to play with, to buy additional goods and services with. And so that's that portion you're really looking for.
Can't hear you, Tommy.
Right.
Sorry. It's 2025. You think I would have learned from now? Luis, yeah, want to hear from you as well. Anything you want to add on to that?
You're on mute, Luis.
I appreciate what Tiffany said because, oftentimes vendor partners oftentimes are not clear about funding sources, right? And school districts do blend. It's a blend of financial resources that school districts use to operate. coming from federal, state, and local sources, and they all have specific rules and typical uses. And understanding that facilitates a better and cleaner conversation with the school district on how to navigate the budget cycle towards the procurement of a service or a product.
Mhm.
No, that's super helpful. And when it comes to if your sales or your client success team, what do they need to understand about the district budgeting cycle? Like when are you looking to purchase? When are you making decisions? Who's involved? What are the buying windows? When do they typically open? When do they typically close? What does that look like?
So a budget cycle usually has 4 phases. It can vary a little bit, but it's primarily 4 phases. And the first one is when you have um, started working on your needs assessment, and that usually happens November, December, on inclusive of district leaders, department heads, um, other stakeholders. Then you move into the priority setting, which happens after the winter break usually, and that's inclusive of the people I mentioned, plus say curriculum people, site administrators, etc. And that goes into the spring, and at the same time, the budgets are being formalized. Then there's the drafting and review, which then brings in the finance, procurement, and the school board members begin to ask questions about what resources are going to be used, what services, what projects, deferred maintenance, construction, etc., things like that. Then there's budget approval that happens towards the end of the school year. And then there's the purchasing and implementation, because you have to use next year dollars to implement. And so the cycle is fairly rigid. There's some flexibility, but for the most part, you have to meet certain deadlines. And so being clear about that also facilitates the conversation, because oftentimes a partner may show up at the wrong time. And then or they come in late into the conversation about purchasing and procuring. So being able to navigate that is very important, because most buying decisions are made on the back end of that budget cycle, and knowing who the key stakeholders are and what the buying windows are really help to support being able to work with a school district.
Awesome, Tiffany. Does that differ between a big district, smaller district? Do buying windows, is that different?
Yeah. Yeah, we Luis and I are from different ends of the spectrum in terms of the size of school districts. He has been a superintendent in very, very large school districts, and I am in small districts, 2 to 7,000 small, which make up the majority of school districts in California. So it's good to know how to work with both. I think the bigger the district, the longer the runway you need. In a small district, we can generally make purchases really quickly. I just talked to a vendor 2 weeks ago, and we're using it today, but it's not a hugely expensive product, and we're just starting it in a pilot. So it depends. Everything, Louis, is true. In a smaller district, you may be able to have a little bit more flexibility. In a small district, sometimes I'm blown away how long things seem to take. So the longer you have in your planning cycle, the better off you are.
Yeah, and Luis, you mentioned like sometimes a seller may come to the conversation late. What is your advice for them? Like, how do they navigate that? What does it look like to build that long-term relationship? Like, what would be your advice for someone that gets to the conversation late, kind of comes in later in the buying cycle?
If the partner, the potential partner is coming in late, then it behooves that partner to really know the school district and the needs of that school district. Products and services become the what districts purchase year over year, and they make decisions about why they're purchasing what they're purchasing. There are normally 8 to 10 different reasons why a school district is purchasing something. So it's a multi-criteria
Mhm.
approach. And if a a potential partner understands what those needs are, it makes it easier for a school district to become receptive to that partner who is coming in with what might be a great tool or
Yeah.
offering great service. But then the district has to make decisions about how it's going to use its resources, right? Because a school district is looking for cost effectiveness and return on its investment, just like the
Yeah.
private sector does. They're looking for coherence and alignment. They're looking for ease of implementation. They're looking for the supports that come with the product or the service. They're looking for evidence, not just data, but evidence of impact. Then
Yeah.
they're looking for the reliability, they're looking for scalability, and they're looking for sometimes data privacy and compliance. If a potential partner knows the answers to many of those questions about what the district is thinking about, then coming in late is not necessarily a no. But let's see what you have, and let's see how it might
Mhm.
fit into what we have with the resources that we have available, or we pivot because what you offer is better and has a greater return on our investment. But understanding to avoid some of that, it's really important to really understand the cycle of a school district. Tiffany's right. Larger school districts are like big boats, right?
Yeah.
Wild to where a smaller one you can pivot faster. And so it's really important for the partner to really understand that dynamic as well.
Awesome. For some reason I had a connectivity issue, and so the questions just came in. So thank you for sending your questions. We will get to those in a second. And please, if you have a question, drop it in the chat. Tiffany, any advice you'd give maybe in a smaller district that smaller both that can pivot? Like, does that matter coming to a conversation later in the buying window? And what would your advice be on that?
It depends. It depends on how much we need the solution. If our status quo really isn't working and I see something and I'm like, man, this is like, we have to have this, because anytime we're buying something, it is a fight against the status quo. We have something right now in that space.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so if this is something that really disrupts the status quo, and I think it meets the unique needs of my district, I think it's something that's going to have an impact, a large impact quickly, then we can probably move a little more quickly. But at the end of the day, a lot of this revolves around your board meeting cycle. So my board only meets once a month. So even if I think it's something, if you come to me the day after a board meeting and we have something we think it's really great, I'm still at least 4 weeks out if it requires board approval to even get it in front of, to maybe even start having that conversation. And then, so I think it depends on the product and it depends on what we need.
Hey, Tommy, can I ask a quick question too? Can I chime
Go
in a
for
little
it.
bit and ask Luis and Tiffany their thoughts on just on thresholds? Like,
Yeah.
every district has certain thresholds before it has to go. We talked about it earlier yesterday about before it goes to the board for approval. Or can you touch on that a little bit about thresholds in terms of amounts that?
I can talk about that. So most districts have a threshold. I typically see it for smaller size district, let's say, up to 15, 20,000, usually $25,000, $30,000, somewhere around there. The thing I think that's really important to understand is anytime I'm bringing a vendor to the board for approval, I am spending my own political capital as a superintendent or as an assistant superintendent. It is costing me something to bring this vendor. So it's really important for me to believe in that vendor. It's really important. If I'm putting my name on it, it's mine. In my district, we just went with a new after school vendor, and we had some folks who were saying, oh, that vendor. And I was saying, no, it's me. I am the person responsible for this. It is my name on that contract. If this fails, it is my political capital. And it's really important to understand that. So I think as we're talking about, if it goes in front of the board, I'm going to be 1,000% sure that this is something I think is good for the district and good for kids. because it's my chips that are going in the middle.
Good point.
I just want to point that out. Like, we think of cost in terms of dollars, and you're pointing out cost in terms of equity, which I think is another form of cost, but just as important to keep in mind when bringing a product. Luis, yeah, what's your thoughts on threshold, like Tom said? Oh, Luis, you're muted.
I think it. So Tiffany's right. I mean, there are thresholds, and some districts have greater thresholds. I worked with $100,000, $150,000 as my threshold, but it was less about the threshold. It's more about what Tiffany was describing as being able to partner with for the service or the product, understanding that we have to put ourselves out there to our board and to our community and sell it, right? It might be great, but there might be some hesitancy. And so how do we then partner with the partner to be able to sell what we believe is good for our school district, good for our students, or good for the adults or the community? And so being able to navigate how we make decisions as leaders in a school district really must include an understanding that those relationships that you are building are there to help sustain you over time and to help you grow. So making intelligent choices is really, really critical, regardless of what your threshold is, because at the end of the day, things end up on the board's desk, right, on the dice. And so being able to be clear about the expectations of that particular product or service is critical.
This question's kind of related, and I think builds off that. It comes from Santiago in the chat. How important are pilots in reducing risk and increasing commitment for purchases? Does that help kind of what we're talking about, like getting board buy-in? Is that a piece of the pie there?
For me, pilots are critical because, again, I'm putting myself out there, and so I either want to know from someone I trust deeply that a product works, whether that's a neighboring school, whether it's Tom Davis, whether it's someone else in a relationship. Go with someone else's experience. If I really trust them and say this is good, worked for me in my district, I've seen a lot of success. Probably, if I don't know you and I don't know, I have to have a pilot. But it's critical for me.
You're cutting out there a little bit, but I think I heard knowing you want to know it comes from a valid source, whether it's you or a pilot, or a person, but that pilot is a piece of that. Luis, what are your thoughts on pilots and reducing risk?
Some districts only pilot before they adopt anything. That's part of the culture of the school district. But I also worked in a district that refused to pilot. It wasn't part of that. It was either you're all in or you're not in. And so it creates a very different dynamic. I've seen piloting efforts work beautifully, where they use then the data and the evidence to then make a decision whether they should go full out or not, whether to extend the pilot, gather more data, and have more evidence. But I've also seen where it remains a pilot and then it dies on the vine because no one else other than the person wanting this product or service and driving the pilot. And so I believe in pilots. I just think that they need to be very well managed with clarity of purpose, but more importantly, a clear action plan. So what's going to happen both in the short term, the midterm, and the long term, and how decisions are going to be made based on whatever data and evidence emerge from those pilots. So that's really important. So maybe Tiffany, because you did do believe in pilots and apply them where you've worked, maybe you can talk a little bit about what happens during and after the pilot, right? So that it doesn't die on the vine. What are the factors that allow it to blossom such that it becomes a district adoption versus one that just crashes and burns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it depends. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tiffany. You froze there. Keep going.
Oh, I was just sitting really still. It's a good question because a lot of times it depends on what the product is, how widespread, and who's driving the pilot, right? If it's driven by a particular school site who's really passionate about it, but it's an entire school site, I think it has a lot more possibility of becoming a district-wide initiative. If it's driven by a few teachers, I think it's really a testing out to see how is this going to go, and are teachers going to collectively buy into this? Sometimes we have a few schools, and sometimes we do pilots because we're really either trying to stay under that board threshold to see if something's worth continuing, or we might do a pilot because we don't have the funding right now. We're gonna have to switch funding to this funding source in the future, and I'm not going to be able to do that unless I have some evidence that it's important and it's going to work. Sometimes the mechanism is, but the pilot's not for implementation. It's a funding tool, really.
I see that. It gives proof for later on if you're going to add it to the budget, or it's a brief period of pause before you can add it to the budget. Just it's a transition period. That makes sense there. We have another question thrown in the chat from Santiago. Is special education considered restricted or unrestricted?
It's restricted, but it's interesting because every single district, I would guess, but all the districts I've ever known to work with have a general fund contribution to special education. So if I'm paying for something and it's special education, I'm probably not paying out of my allocated special ed sources. I'm paying out of my general fund. So even though special education itself is restricted, I'm still buying anything new out of the general fund, which is unrestricted. I'm simplifying, but that's generally how it works.
Is that different in a larger district, Luis?
No, it isn't. Understanding that special education students are a subset of the larger population and engage in activities and experiences just like the larger. So oftentimes, and more often than not, they have the same access, right? And so you can justify how funding sources flex to address that because they do participate in the general education population. And the mistake we often make is by saying those kids, right? Those kids, they get their own funding, they get their own resource, and therefore sometimes vendors migrate that way, thinking, well, I'm only going to be, it's for this particular population. But district leaders do not think that way, right? Let's box them in and let's have that conversation because they serve all students, and oftentimes the funding is flexed to support that.
Yeah,
that's super valuable insight. And I think this next question comes from the chat, and it goes back to a previous thing we talked about, like the buying, purchasing cycle. Matt is asking, could you maybe provide a real example of a purchase cycle of a recent product? How did it proceed? Maybe how did it come to you? Is it just, an email, or, how did it proceed from start to finish to the release of fundings? Kind of walk through, a little case study.
I can give you an example for me. There's, I don't know if I can use the actual name of the company or not, but there's a product that is about hall passes and students getting hall passes to go. So we have a local district that uses it, our high school district. We're a K-8. And so I know that I want to use this product. I've heard great things about it. It's been very successful at the high school district. So again, I've got that already. It's coming from a trusted source that this is something that works. I want my kids to be used to using this product when they get to high school. And we have a problem with our current hall pass system, which is, teachers tying a brick to a chain. That doesn't work. So we have a need for something because the status quo is not efficient. So I, as the assistant superintendent, which actually I have nothing, I'm like, we should be using Minga, and I'm hearing complaints. So I brought Minga to the principals The principals said, yes, we think we can implement this. Sorry, I'm saying the product. Oops. But there's a lot of features that when our principals are getting sold, like when they're talking to the rep, they want all the features. And I'm like, no, you're not going to get all the features. We're starting with the base. You show me you can get to 90% implementation. And then in the next funding cycle, we can talk about if you're going to add the next level and the next level and the next level. But I want to see that you're using it. So right off the bat, I've got 4 middle schools. One's at 90% a month later. One hasn't even logged in one time. And then the other one's like, well, we're going to implement. So we ended up dropping 2 schools off because they said they wanted it, and then things happened, right? The 2 schools that are using it are great, and then we've added on the additional features for those 2 schools, and then we ultimately have now renewed for a couple of years, and at varying levels, and that was our cycle for us in that particular instance. Everyone's a little bit different, but that's an example of a small district.
Tiffany, go a little bit deeper though on what the vendor should have done, or the partner should have done to get the other 2 schools to sign up. You know what I mean?
Right. I would have liked to have seen, hey, Dr. Morris, we've noticed that this school hasn't logged on and it's been 2 months. Would you like me to reach out to them? Would you like me to go out to the site? Would you like me to come to a staff meeting and support them and show the features? I ended up having somebody high school district come and show my staff how they were using it, which was really effective for the people who attended that. But I set all of that up myself with connections that I had, because I believe in the product. That's an example of where our relationship could be a little bit better and deeper. And if we had to come to funding cuts, I could feel a little bit more supported in that relationship. And I think it would go long, long ways. Because if I leave, I don't know if anyone else would continue. This was my, the schools like it now, but I would like to see that relationship deeper.
I will say, when I was teaching, I used to have one of those like magnetic hall passes that would come, at the end of the year, be broken into 15 pieces. So that would have been nice.
Yes.
Luis, do you have an example of maybe in a larger district, kind of the life cycle of purchasing, and like kind of some of the decision makers involved in that process as well?
Yeah, and sometimes the situations that cause you to have to make a purchasing decision comes late into the cycle, because it was only through the needs assessment and that you discovered something that you didn't really address till, say, the spring. After the pandemic, in the school district where I was at, there was the need for additional supports, and the school district was not about bringing police officers onto the campus. It wasn't about having more security, but there had to be a mechanism for addressing the safety issues right after the pandemic, because everyone's heightened in nerves, right? The nerves were heightened. And so it was through community meetings, it was through conversations that it happened, that having electronic markers at the entrance would help that by checking, by automating the checking of backpacks, right? But that didn't happen till April, because there was a push and pull about whether we wanted to create a different kind of environment by checking people's backpacks, everyone coming onto the campus. And so that led to conversations inclusive of all community members, of the sheriffs, of city officials. So it turned into a big thing. And so the decision was not made till April that's what was needed. So now the needs assessment didn't happen till the spring, right? So we were late into the cycle because the decision to move forward was not voted on till late into the spring. And so then we had to speak to different vendors, sample different tools that are available. And so it was a very small window of time to make a decision like that. That's not what you want. right? You really want to follow the extended cycle that starts before the break and takes you all the way to the end of the school year, because then you do a better job of identifying the need and then being able to find solutions for that, and what tools you're going to be using.
Let me ask a quick question, Luis, in terms of a need to have solution versus a nice to have solution, because doesn't it help expedite if you need something like right away? Doesn't it help expedite the process? I'm talking about something that you really need. Like, it's like right now, people need attendance recovery software, for recapture ADA, right? That's a hot topic I hear about every day. Versus hall pass. You know what I mean? No disrespect to what Tiffany's doing.
I get you. In my experience, it comes down to the kinds of relationships that you've established to determine how quickly you can move something. I've experienced and seen where, regardless of how urgent it is, you get a no, and it's not going to go anywhere because the pushback is just incredible. Then I've also experienced situations where decisions are made quickly because there's a trust and a belief and alignment in the belief that, yes, it isn't urgent, that, right? So for example, the need to have electronic markers at entrances, as I said, took place in April, so the procurement was ready by July 1. But the conversation, because there was so much push, took a long time to develop. And so had there been a process that would have more quickly brought the conversation to agreement, we wouldn't have had to deal with such a rapid turnaround in trying to find that particular tool that was going to be used in our school district. So yeah, it matters. It does to expedite things, but the relationships that the superintendent or district lead has with the stakeholders truly matters in being able to move things faster or not.
I think a common theme I'm hearing is relationships, not just, in your example, Luis, but I think Tiffany and yours, right? That relationship and like that sounds to be, that partnership sounds to be key throughout the entire buying process. This question comes from James. This is, do districts prefer vendors who provide multiple services or specialized vendors? Do you have experience with both, like a one-stop shop, or like a vendor that has just one very particular services, or is that even a factor in your decisions?
It's not really a factor for me. But Luis, what do you think?
It depends on what it is. Some require a specialization, and we're not just talking about. There are vendors who carry multiple products and services, and my experience has been both good and bad. Being able to provide the back end support is critical. If they have too many programs or tools that none, they all have, it seemed to me that they all had the same import, and it was more about just selling one of them. Where I've seen some that have multiple, and they do a beautiful job because of the way that company is organized. And then, but when you're dealing with someone who's specialized, sometimes it's a little too narrow. The specialization is a little too narrow, and they can't provide the back end support as comprehensively as is needed. So I think it varies, and that's why being able to have a good vetting system for your products or services is a critical part of the procurement process, right? The adoption of instructional materials, or when you need to build, for example, becomes really important to really know who you're partnering with. That's critical more than whether they're specialized or they're generalists.
Tiffany, anything you want to add there? This comes from James, who's the director of UK soccer school. And so Yeah, do you have anything to add on that?
I think Luis is right. It depends. It's hard to say. I find sometimes the bigger companies are right, which the less my individual relationship matters, or I sometimes lose a little bit of that relationship. Over the course of my career, I've worked with a number of vendors who get bought out by bigger companies who obviously are maybe doing multiple things. To leave those after a bit of time because it just doesn't feel the same, or I don't have that same relationship. Not always, but so for me, if you can offer multiple services but have the same level of relationship and care and ability to meet the unique needs of my district and my students, then it that's great. Doing more things at the cost of that relationship, I think, is a pitfall.
Awesome.
Can I add something real quick to what Tiffany's saying? Because it goes back to her and Luis's role in the district as leaders, and so that political capital is huge for them. The point I want to make is, I'm not going to bring crap to you if I'm working with a company that I feel that doesn't have the right product or service. I'm not going to bring it to you, Tiffany. I'm not going to bring it to you, Luis. I'm going to leave it in the backside. I'm not going to disturb that relationship. Because if it's not going to help you, it's not going to make you look good, then I'm not going to bring it to you. That's just me, though. So I'm just sharing that with you because the reality is sometimes people have to bring stuff to you because they have a quota or a number to make, but you don't need it.
Right. But it does happen, right? It does happen. One of the reasons school leaders, and I'm sure the folks listening who are partners with districts, that sometimes they can't get a hold of people, and there are times when the district personnel intentionally does not answer the phone, or shies away from a conversation with is based on experience, right? We have been burned or have had bad experiences, and so that's why we keep, both Tiffany and I keep talking about relationships and partnering, because we want to trust who we work with, because the work that districts do is about addressing the needs of large populations of students, oftentimes the neediest populations of students, and we don't want to have to spend time making correction to something that we procured because it doesn't do what it was supposed to do. Right. And so we become a little skeptical sometimes of and so it's really important.
Can I just tell a quick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Go for it.
You're fine. I'm sorry. I froze, so I couldn't hear you still talking.
Go for it, Tiffany.
I was just going to say, so just a quick story. Before I became superintendent, I focused on results, and Tom and focused on results. I was not yet a superintendent, and I heard a presentation from a vendor. Oh, okay.
Maybe try to turn off your screen. I wonder if it helps the connection.
Yeah. Let me try that really quick. All right. Let's try that just for a minute and see if it reset. So before I was a superintendent, I went to Focus on Results when Tom ran Focus on Results. And I heard this amazing presentation about a new math program. And I thought, like, someday I'm going to implement this math program. I love this concept. I love the proof of concept. I love the evidence he's showing. So I became a superintendent 2 years later or a year later. I looked up this vendor. I used him, first district in California to fully implement it as a district-wide curriculum. Used that for a while, left that district. Later, I'm in a new district. He's reaching out to me. It's not a good fit in this district. It just wasn't. We tried it. I talked about it with principals. They were like, no, we don't want to do this. So later, we're looking for an after-school program, and I reach out to Tom again, and then this vendor reaches out and says, hey, I've worked with these people. We end up having a $5 million contract with this after school vendor because of the relationship that I've had with this vendor for more than a decade from a focus on results. So one, having those trusted partners like Tom, like Kalsa, like AXA, places where you meet people who are not going to bring you, as Tom said, crap, is key. I trust those people more than a blind email, more than a booth at a session, more than anything else. I have to know someone I personally trust, recommend it to me in order for me to spend my political capital on that.
I thought maybe we should get that on a coffee mug. Do not bring crap. It's got to be good stuff. We got two questions in the chat.
Critical. Like
Go
knowing
ahead,
what's
Tiffany.
crap. I said,
yeah,
knowing what's crap, and if a vendor ever brings me something, the relationship is going to break.
Yeah. We got two questions I really want to touch on before we get the time, but I will say we want future webinars. So if you're here right now, maybe throw an idea of a webinar you want to see in 2026. We got a great lineup coming, but throw an idea of a future webinar you want to see in the chat. But here's this question, going back to something we talked about earlier. What is, you're bringing something to the board. What's the best way for a seller to support you so you're not left on an island? What does that relationship look like? And how does a seller kind of really come alongside you in that?
Once the partnership begins to be established, I think a smart district leader leverages the expertise that the sales rep or that the company has to help craft the narrative that's going to be established around a particular product or service that is then going to go to stakeholders, is going to go to the board. It will become a presentation that will be eventually voted on. And so it behooves a district leader to really insist on that connection that, and I've seen both, right? In some of the larger districts where staff want to take it and own the whole thing, and we would then drive it ourselves. But I also saw where the vendor partner actually co-presented, right? To talk about the technical pieces of the product. And they were there for the community conversations, for the teacher talks, because ultimately they were the ones who were going to be using the tool in the classroom. And so being able to establish that kind of relationship became critical throughout the entire cycle for the school district.
I would say, to Louise's point, if you're presenting, some boards really have the vendors present. It looks a little different places. But if you're having somebody present at my board meeting, give me your strongest person. I have to have somebody who has credibility, who has authority, that the board trusts. Recently, we had someone present, and they sent, I would say, kind of their JV person, and it wasn't great. And again, I was a little, it wasn't my item, but I was a little embarrassed for the person bringing that item. We didn't have, it just didn't convey in the meeting. And it might be a great product, but like if you're presenting in front of a board, you have to bring your A game and your A people to the table.
That's good to know.
Advice.
I want to, and this time you have another question you want to throw out. I want to end with this, and we talked about this earlier, but looking at 2026, whatever side of the political spectrum you fall on, there have been changes to funding, and there's funding at risk, funding cuts, funding freezes, and so what do you think the landscape? This comes from Colleen. What federal funds are at risk? What's the best way for a company from the sales perspective, but also kind of going to that client success, that partner for current initiatives, like best way to partner in this current climate?
I'll go. So one of the things leaders today are experiencing is the expiration of a lot of budgets, different budgets that primarily came from the federal government, like ESSER dollars, right? And so, as a consequence of that, district have found themselves, many districts, with budget gaps, especially those that use their one-time dollars, the soft dollars, for ongoing costs, personnel, for example. And the inflation attached, is outpacing funding increases, right? So there are many factors. State funding is flat in most states, or very slowly growing. Um, with the closure of the Department of Education and the distribution of categorical dollars, Title One, Title Two, Title Three, etc., to other departments, as an example, there's no new stimulus, that is expected, for school districts, and so districts are having to prioritize around core programs and personnel. As a result, there's a cutting back on supplemental services, and technology upgrades, right? And both of those things, technology upgrades and supplementals, have always experienced are the ones that always experience the the dropping off the budgets, because it goes in cycles, right? Budgets are cyclical, and when they're cyclical, what the focus becomes is reading, writing, arithmetic, right? So it becomes, and whatever mandates there are, but a lot of the enrichment and supplemental services and the technology, suffer during those periods, and so many districts are consolidating. Going back to the question about, multi-purpose, multi-use companies that actually have multiple products, there could be a benefit because of getting a better deal. You have to work with the school, with districts, work with providers for multi-year contracts to lower the amount. What are the accommodations that a partner is going to make, knowing that the budgets are short, are now, shorting, where before they were longer, right? And so all of those become really important, pieces to consider when working with a school district.
Can I add to that? So I was talking over these questions with another superintendent, and he was saying that they're maybe going to have a qualified budget coming up. And they've been talking to their vendors that they've had, and they have a vendor that they've had for 10 years. And they were saying, we think, we have to make these budget cuts, just like Luis is saying. And the product costs, it's a ed tech product, costs $3 a kid. And knowing that they're going to have this issue, the vendor came back and said, how about this? We'll do 50 cents a kid for the remainder of the year, and we'll do $1 a kid for the following year. And then we'll talk. So I think it's really important for having this budget conversation to know there are up years and down years for every district with all funding sources. And so being able to, if you're big enough and if you can weather that, and if you value that partnership over the long term, and when districts need a little flexibility, be able to offer that flexibility, I can guarantee you this vendor is going to have a contract as long as the superintendent is the superintendent, because they've shown that they're interested in the long-term success of the district. And so they're not going to go out and find another vendor to provide this service. They're going to stick with the people who stuck with them through the bad times.
That's great stuff, Tiffany. Tommy, my questions, and we're over time right now, but my final question would be just to talk typically, Luis and Tiffany, about the current state of affairs with funding in California. Let's look at California specifically. What is being spent and what's not where not to go to, in other words, people aren't buying things right now. This is the worst time in my whole 30 years of doing this EdTech business that I've seen this market be this bad right now. Can you touch on areas that we're spending money, or where there is some hope for some funding somewhere a little bit before we close?
So, after school program, mental health, right? There's a lot of money in after school programs. That math vendor I was telling you about, they didn't work for my regular system, but they're in my after school program now. And that's where we have money, and it's flexible. Will it go away someday? Yes. But right now there's money in that. And there's a little bit of money in mental health, depending on your district.
Becoming smarter about how to integrate funding without breaking laws or policies becomes very critical, because, as you said, funding is flatlining or actually declining by 2% per year between 25 and 26, and it might continue to 26, 27, state funding. So, and we're not as bad off as many other states. And so that's the upside. The downside is that district leaders have to become smarter about how they partner and who they partner with to be able to leverage the resources they do have. Right. As Tiffany indicated, there is money in, for example, some of those after school programs. How can they be leveraged? Well, many grow their after school programs by having more students participate in ELOP, for example, right? And then now they have access to certain supports that they wouldn't have during the course of the day. But that's just a small number of students. How do we maximize what our resources can do to serve as many students and staff as possible?
This has been an amazing conversation. I thank you both for being here tonight. And thanks for everyone here as well that you joined us. So thank you to Elise and Tiffany and my partner in crime here, Tom Davis. And if you want to, before ways to connect with Tiffany and Luis, we'll have it in kind of we'll have this recording. We'll share it out so you can follow them. And really, I think a key takeaway here is if you sell to or support K through 12 schools, I mean, relationships are key, and the ability to talk to district leaders about funding isn't optional. It's really a necessary skill in building that long-term relationship. And so, we're going to have webinars in 2026. We have a great lineup coming, so stay tuned for that as well. A great way to learn how to build those relationships, a great way to how to build a partnership, whether you're a sales professional or a client success manager, is our K through 12 Impact Academies. And so our academies teach you how to speak the language of district leadership, how to align your solution to priorities and funding sources, and how to move from just site level wins to system-wide impact. And I think even what you said, Tiffany, of like, not just from the sales side, but the client success side of how actually to be that partner, that you're there in the good times and the bad times. And that's what you learn in our academies. And so if you want to keep learning, growing, and building skills, we'd love to have you join one of our, our free community. And as well, stay tuned for the exciting things we have in 2026. Thank you for spending your evening with us. We're honored to support you as you grow your impact in K through 12. And everyone, have a good night.
Happy holidays, everybody. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Luis.
Our pleasure.
Everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys.